This is not breaking news. This is not a scandal. This is not about one person. This is about something quieter, more efficient, something that only works if you're not looking directly at it. What happens when the federal government stops acting like a system and starts acting like a switch? On for some people, off for others. Not because the law changed, not because Congress voted, but because alignment was measured and compliance was assumed. You are told this is normal friction. Routine politics, you are told the system is holding, but systems don't fail all at once. They fail by learning, by adapting, by discovering which rules can be bent without consequences. If this feels abstract, stay with me. Because the abstraction is the point. If you're still here, you already sense it. And if you want to understand how this actually works, you'll want to keep watching. Because this doesn't begin with punishment, it begins with permission. You were taught to look for power in elections, in speeches, in personalities. That's not where it is anymore. Real control now lives somewhere duller. In timing, in eligibility, in who gets processed first and who suddenly doesn't qualify. The system still speaks the language of law. Forms are filled out, procedures are cited. Everything appears intact, but the center of gravity has shifted. Power no longer needs to persuade. It doesn't even need to punish loudly. It just reallocates, delays, reinterprets. What matters is not what the rules say, but who decides when they apply. This is how a system stops being neutral without announcing it. The structure remains, the outcomes don't. You can live inside this change for years and never name it, because nothing officially breaks. But once discretion replaces obligation, once loyalty becomes a variable, the system is no longer governing. It's sorting. And that's where the danger accelerates. Because this shift doesn't look like control. It looks like management, and management, once normalized, is very hard to reverse. There was a time when federal power moved in one direction. Outward, predictable, almost boring. Money was appropriated. Rules were written. States complied or challenged them in court. That was the rhythm. Now compare that to what exists today. The same laws are on the books. The same agencies exist. The same checks are advertised, but the behavior is different. Support is no longer automatic. It is conditional, sometimes quietly paused, sometimes selectively interpreted, sometimes rerouted without explanation. Before, disagreement triggered debate. Now, it triggers review, audit, delay. And delay is the most invisible form of force. This change didn't arrive with an announcement. It arrived as a convenience, as flexibility, as case-by-case judgment. That's why it was easy to accept, and that's why it's dangerous. Because slow change teaches institutions to adapt downward, to expect pressure, to brace instead of resist. Over time, the abnormal becomes procedural. And once that happens, the system no longer needs to break the rules. It only needs to keep redefining what normal looks like. And that sets the stage for the first real shock. Then here's where the abstraction collides with reality. A decision is made quietly, administratively, funding already approved, projects already underway, suddenly marked for termination, not because they failed, not because they broke the rules, but because of where they are and how those places voted. Energy funding, infrastructure, pulled back from certain states, preserved in others. It doesn't come with a press conference. It comes with paperwork until something unusual happens. A federal judge stops it, coldly, precisely. The ruling is narrow, almost boring, illegal, blocked. Then it happens again, a major offshore wind project. Serving multiple states, ordered shut down. Again, no scandal language, just a court stepping in, saying no. If you're counting, this is not resistance, it's interruption. And that matters, because these aren't isolated losses. They're signals. The system tried to enforce loyalty through infrastructure and hit a wall. If you think that ends the story, don't click away, because what happens next is what systems do when they're told no. They don't stop, they adapt. Here's the part that usually stays off camera. Because the real mechanism isn't the cut, it's the leverage before the cut. Federal funding doesn't move all at once. It moves through layers: eligibility, certification, renewal, discretion. Every layer creates friction. Every friction point creates power. If you control the timing, you don't need to cancel anything. You just slow it down. You ask for revisions. You reinterpret guidance. Who benefits is obvious. The center, the executive layer that decides what clears today and what waits until after the news cycle. Who absorbs the damage is quieter. States planning budgets, cities signing contracts, families relying on services that suddenly pause without explanation. Nothing here looks like punishment on paper. That's the genius of it. Because when the harm arrives, it's diffuse, delayed, hard to trace back to intent. And that's why courts keep stepping in after the fact. They can block the cut. They can't rewind the delay. By the time the system is told it went too far, the pressure has already done its work. And once a system learns that delay is effective, it doesn't need to break the law again. It just needs to keep operating in the gray. And that gray is where the next shock lands. Then the tempo changes. The moves get smaller, faster, sharper. A professional organization speaks out, not a protest, not a rally, words. The response isn't public, it's administrative. Grants, already awarded, quietly pulled, no debate about merit, no finding of failure, just cancellation until a judge intervenes. Again, illegal retaliation, funding restored, then elections, not results. Rules, money used as leverage. Change this or lose that, a court stops it flatly. No authority, none. Social services, childcare, frozen. Billions. Targeted by geography, by party, blocked again. If this feels repetitive, that's the point. This isn't chaos. It's pattern recognition. Every time one path is closed, another opens. Each loss teaches the system where the line is, how far it can lean, how quickly it can retreat. And each time, the response comes after the pressure, after the signal is sent. This isn't a breakdown, it's a feedback loop. And loops don't stop on their own. They tighten, which is where this finally stops being abstract. Because now, it reaches you. This is where it stops being about institutions and starts being about proximity, because you don't experience this as a court ruling. You experience it as a notice, a delay, a cost increase you didn't plan for, childcare doesn't open on time. A program pauses, a grant-backed service disappears quietly. No one tells you why. There's no announcement that says, this is political. You're just told funding is under review, that timelines have shifted, that things are uncertain. And uncertainty is expensive. It forces choices earlier than planned. Moves you didn't want to make, coverage you can't afford to lose. This is how systemic pressure reaches the ground, not as ideology, as logistics. If you're still watching, it's because you've felt this before, without being able to name it. This isn't about winning an argument. It's about whether governance still works, without requiring loyalty. If you want to understand why this keeps happening and why it's not contained here, stay with me. Because once systems learn this tactic, they export it. And the ripple doesn't stop at the border, because once this logic proves effective, it doesn't stay domestic. Funding pressure becomes a language. Delay becomes a signal. Conditional support becomes policy. Other governments notice, not the speeches. The mechanics, They see how infrastructure can be paused without declaring conflict, how cooperation can be narrowed without breaking agreements. Energy projects stall. Research partnerships hesitate. Data sharing slows. No one announces retaliation. They just become cautious. Markets respond first. Then alliances, then planning horizons shrink. This is how a local tactic becomes a global pattern, not through imitation, but through adjustment. When trust becomes conditional, every system starts pricing in risk. And the most dangerous part is that nothing here looks dramatic enough to trigger alarms. There's no crisis meeting, no emergency summit, just quieter cooperation, shorter commitments, more exits. The world doesn't see collapse. It sees unreliability, and unreliability spreads faster than ideology. So now the question isn't whether this system can function. The question is what kind of system it becomes when pressure replaces predictability. And that's where the future accelerates. Because from here, there are only a few possible directions. From here, the system doesn't choose a single outcome. It opens paths. One path is adjustment. Institutions harden. Courts intervene faster. Congress reasserts itself more often. The system becomes heavier, slower, more procedural. It still functions, but only through constant correction. Governing turns into containment. Another path is erosion. The pressure keeps working. Delays normalize. Conditional support becomes expected. Institutions stop resisting every time because resistance is expensive. Nothing collapses. It just thins. The rules remain. The confidence behind them doesn't, and then there's rupture. Not dramatic, not immediate, a moment when a delayed decision can't be reversed in time. When a blocked action arrives too late. When an institution discovers its authority was intact on paper, but irrelevant in practice. None of these paths require intent. They only require repetition, and the most unsettling part is that the system can slide between them without announcing which one it's on. You don't get a warning label. You don't get a countdown. You just wake up one day inside the version that won. And by then, the question isn't how this started. It's whether anyone remembers how to stop it. And this is where I stop short on purpose. Because the danger here is not that the system breaks, it's that it works. Differently, quietly. Without asking for your attention, you are not meant to feel alarmed. You are meant to adapt, to plan around delays, to expect uncertainty, to lower your expectations of what governance provides. That's how this locks in, not through force, through fatigue. When courts say no often enough, that becomes background noise. When Congress pushes back intermittently, that feels like relief, not resolution. And relief is not stability. The system survives, but it teaches a lesson. That pressure is allowed. That punishment can be tested. That the cost is rarely paid by the people applying it. If you think this ends with a ruling, or an election, or a single institution holding the line, you're missing the point. This doesn't end cleanly. It just continues or it doesn't, based on what is tolerated. So don't treat this as a conclusion, treat it as a warning label. If you want to understand what comes next, how this logic spreads, and where it finally snaps, you'll want to stay with this. Because the most dangerous systems don't announce themselves. They normalize, and once that happens, the cost of looking away is always higher than you expect.